Welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-jung Cho. A North Atlantic Treaty Organization summit will be held in Washington to mark the 75th anniversary of the alliance. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol and other leaders from NATO's 4 Asia-Pacific partners will also join. Today, we discuss the convergence of Euro-Atlantic and Indo-Pacific security and the deepening relationship between North Korea and Russia.
As partners in Asia see challenges halfway around the world, in Europe as being relevant to them.
We see how much military support Russia gets from North Korea.
We are concerned about the implications both in Europe and in the Indo-Pacific.
In the studio with me, Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council until July of last year. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks and National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as a Senior Analyst for U.S. Forces Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Also joining us, Mr. Glenn Korn, an adjunct professor at the Institute of World Politics. He's also the Senior Director for Geopolitics and Global Threat Assessments at the Institute of Critical Infrastructure and Technology. Mr. Korn is a former senior executive in the CIA who spent 34 years serving in the U.S. intelligence, defense, and foreign policy communities, including 20-plus years at the U.S. diplomatic missions in Eurasia, the Middle East, and South Asia, and assignments overseas as the President's representative for intelligence matters to 4 separate countries. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Now, Mr. Seiler, after Putin's visit to Pyongyang, there are growing concerns that Russia and North Korea has elevated their relationship to de facto alliance, threatening global security. And U.S. Senator described Putin-Kim meeting as Hitler meeting Mussolini, and retired general said this is the greatest threat since World War II. There are others who dismiss the implications, though. Does the U.S. government really think that the meeting so seriously? And does the deepening North Korea-Russia relationship shake up U.S. global strategy and situations on the Korean Peninsula?
Those are great questions, Eun-jung. And I think if you look at the summit for people who've been watching closely the developments over the past few years in Russia-North Korea relations, I don't think there's anything in the summit itself that was particularly surprising. The agreements reached on cooperation in the softer areas like the economy and cultural and educational exchanges, the commitment to some type of military cooperation, and also even the language on the treaty and the mutual defense aspects of it were all areas that one could have anticipated, or two, have sufficient loopholes built in as to be non-committal, so that if you look at the agreement itself or the summit itself, it's very troubling strategically in what it says about the global world order and how North Korea may benefit from the relationship. But there was nothing particularly earth-shattering about that summit. As we go forward, this is an area that we knew we had to be concerned with, that in exchange for meeting Moscow's desires for munitions to execute the war in Ukraine, we have a willing partner and a somewhat capable partner in North Korea helping them. And then in return, North Korea itself and its own ambitions of locking in its nuclear status, establishing relationship with countries like Russia who are willing to turn a blind eye to the North's nuclear weapons program or to sanctions, and to build a future going forward where similar like-minded countries are able to throw a lifeline to North Korea. This is exactly what North Korea has been seeking in its diplomacy for some time now. So the summit was disappointing. in what it reflects about what we knew was already underway. But as far as this being something like Kim Il-sung on the eve of June 25th, 1950, communicating with Stalin and laying out the plans for some invasion within the coming months or years, I think what we saw was far from that.
Mr. Korn, influence comes from economic power. Russia's GDP last year didn't make it into the top 10, and GDP per capita ranks between 60th and 70th in the world. And although Russia is considered one of the strongest military powers in the world, CPRI said that U.S. military spending was $916 billion, and Russia's was 1/9 of that, spent $109 billion. Shouldn't we be more realistic about Russia's powers and its capabilities?
Thank you for your question. I would hope that we don't underestimate the danger that Russia presents to, one, its neighbors. We've seen in Ukraine since 2014, and of course after February 2022 with the expanded invasion of Ukraine, that the Russians, despite their economic problems, can inflict a lot of damage on their neighbors and cause a lot of chaos for other countries. So my own assessment is the Russians have the ability to spoil in a lot of regions around the world, especially in what they call their near abroad. I'm not sure that they have the ability to bring much positive to those countries. That's not what I saw in my experience in that region. But we shouldn't underestimate the Russians, and we should not underestimate their willingness and the Putin regime's willingness to focus all their resources on waging a war against the Ukrainians right now, continue occupation of Georgian territory, and their continued occupation of Moldovan territory.
Mm-hmm. Is Putin using North Korea? His visit to Pyongyang, was it a show to the world that, look what I can give to North Korea, look what North Korea will do with the weapons that I give to North Korea, the technology I give it to North Korea? Was Putin somehow threatening the world with this relationship with North Korea?
I believe Putin was trying to threaten South Korea to some degree, to send a message that he can cause more destabilization for the government of South Korea. I'm sure he's concerned, given the capabilities of the South Korean armed forces and industry, technology, one of the leading countries in the world in the defense area and high technology. And I'm sure he's concerned that the South Koreans can become a very, very important partner for, of course, NATO. They're already an important partner, but for Ukraine. And of course, I think Putin is also desperate for international recognition. He's been very isolated since he made the strategic mistake of expanding his invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. And I think he's looking for people that will receive him and try and show the rest of the world, especially countries that are currently seeing how isolated he is, that he is not completely isolated. And that's why he's making some of these foreign trips.
And you talked about Russia's economic hardship. Does Putin have cash to give North Korea? And will Putin give sensitive technologies to North Korea that he didn't share with any other countries? And him going to North Korea for the first time in more than 20 years, does he want something more than ammunition?
I think we've seen that Putin is willing to sell off the natural resources of Russia, which is a very rich country in potential in natural resources, and also its human capital, unfortunately, in order to sustain what he believes is the policy that he has to promote for his own, to protect his own regime. In terms of will the Russians provide sensitive technology to North Korea, I don't believe they want to do that. I don't think that they will deliberately do that, but of course we need to be concerned about that, and we need to watch that very carefully in the West. And I believe that he definitely needs the help from North Korea to sustain his war. In Ukraine, we've seen, unfortunately, that Iran and North Korea are providing weapon systems, ammunition that are being used to kill innocent civilians every day in Ukraine.
Well, he was getting all those ammunitions even before making that long trip to North Korea. He must have wanted something more than just ammunitions. Mercenaries?
I guess there's potential for that. But I think, again, the main purpose of the visit, I think, was to send a message to South Korea and maybe other countries in the Asia-Pacific region that he could cause destabilization. And of course, the trip came as we get ready for the NATO summit in Washington, which I'm sure he's watching very closely and with great concern.
And Mr. Seiler, much attention has been on the Comprehensive Partnership Agreement, which is stipulated that when any of the side is attacked by another country, the other side will get involved with all means possible at disposal. And realistically, there's no possibility that South Korea or United States will attack North Korea. Then do you think North Korea and Russia were calculatively, strategically thinking of China's possible border intrusion?
I think when you look at a treaty like this, you have to have a realist perspective as you look at how countries interact with each other, the promises they make, the commitments they make, and then the loopholes they use to get out of the commitments that they make. I recall, a few years back, the North Koreans said publicly what we have often heard from them privately, which is, during the Cold War, we never thought under the 1961 treaty that Moscow was going to risk nuclear war with the United States to defend the DPRK. And so, in justifying their own pursuit of nuclear weapons, their lack of confidence in Russia's commitment to the security of North Korea was always one of the top 2 or 3 excuses that they put on the table. So we know there's a lot of skepticism in North Korea about, just how far Putin will want to go. But they enjoyed the symbolism of the meeting. They enjoyed the symbolism of the confirmation, essentially, of North Korea's newfound strategic status, and the symbolism of an apparent alliance that would be a thorn in the side of the United States. So, questioning scenarios under which that treaty might be applied could be a fool's errand. I think immediately what we can see, though, is although both sides continue to deny the ongoing munitions production and shipments to Russia, they have created in the treaty kind of a condition under which Russia, claiming to have been, invaded by Ukraine or its actions as being defensive, would otherwise justify North Korea's support to Russia.
And Mr. Korn, North Korea's recent satellite and missile launches all failed. So people are skeptical that Russia already gave any missile technology to North Korea. But as you just said, that you were skeptical that Russia will give sensitive technology to North Korea unless forced. Then under what circumstances do you think Russia may give sensitive technology to North Korea? Will Russian element become a feature of future North Korean weapons?
Again, I don't think that the Russians have any interest in providing North Korea with the sensitive technologies to enable the North Koreans to present a threat even to Russia in the future. I think the Russians are probably hoping that they can get through this war, this conflict in Ukraine, and then reestablish some semblance of relations with Europe, with the EU, with the United States at some point. And the North Koreans, I agree with you, they have to be very aware that Moscow will jettison them very quickly if it means improving relations with the West at some point. I think more the concern is the brain drain from Russia or the loss of technology that could happen, that could enable the North Koreans in the future, their nuclear program or their ballistic missile system program. And we also have to be very aware that in Ukraine today, what we're seeing on the battlefield is that both sides have demonstrated that there is a lot of technology that's being developed at let's say a lower level, at a grassroots level, that is very dangerous. It's enabled both sides to inflict great damage on the other side. And when the conflict in Ukraine is over, we also have to all be very aware that some of the talent pool is going to be looking for work. And the United States, of course, is going to have to watch that. And we're going to need strong allies like our South Korean partners to help us watch that and stop any proliferation in the future.
No, that's true. I think if you look at the history of the North Korean nuclear program, you see the Soviet fingerprints over it, but it would be a stretch to say that Russia actively desired that North Korea would secure this capability and become a thorn in our side like it has now. In fact, over the history of the Cold War period and in the early days of the six-party talks, I think few questioned the Soviet Union's and then subsequently Russia's commitment to non-proliferation fundamentals. I remember Russia would always be one of the first to say that the IAEA needed to be on the ground early on, to be the organization there that would validate verify any type of progress in denuclearization of the six-party talks process. More recently, Director of National Intelligence Avril Haines made public comments suggesting that what the intelligence community is seeing suggests that this strong commitment to non-proliferation may be a thing of the past. And that is troubling because, again, it's classically in these types of relationships, a larger partner, in this case Russia, does not want to provide capabilities to the junior partner that would entangle it in some type of broader conflict with the United States.
And Mr. Korn, you mentioned about how Russia in the long run would like to restore relationship with the West. And some analysts also say that Russia would like to restore relationship with South Korea. And historically, when North Korea cozied up with either Russia or China, it alienated itself from Russia and China. And China doesn't like the fact that United States is strengthening its alliance relationship in Northeast Asia. Now, under all these complex circumstances, how can United States and its allies best pursue their interests in the region?
Well, I think one, we should not allow neither the governments in Washington or Seoul or the NATO leadership in Brussels allow Putin to deter us from making decisions and adopting policies that are in the best interest of the people of the United States, Europe, and South Korea. You raised China. It's also interesting, important part of the discussion, because I'm sure the Chinese have no interest in the Russians providing North Korea with sensitive technology or giving them any further assistance that would become a problem for Beijing, which is probably Russia's most important ally, if we can call them an ally right now. I know there's a lot of talk about their strategic partnership, but I think in both Beijing and Moscow, or in Russia and China, there's a lot of concern about one another. And I personally question the long-term efficacy of an alliance between China and Russia. And Putin, of course, in doing what he did, may have upset the Chinese. He may have made another strategic mistake like he did in February 2022, because I believe this should send a message to the South Koreans that they are definitely an important partner for NATO and Ukraine. And if Russia wants to have, and I think that it's in their best interest, Putin may not see that now, but it's in Russia's best interest to have a good relationship with South Korea, which is a modern country with a strong economy, which has in the past and can in the future help the Russian people live better. But if Moscow is going to continue to play with North Korea to try and threaten the South, hopefully our allies in the South will not be deterred by that or allow that to deter them from taking policies that benefit the alliance they have with the United States, NATO, and to help the Ukrainians.
This is so important. And what comes to mind as I hear you speak, Len, is the confidence in global thinking from Seoul that will be required, because it will be so easy for cynics to say, why would we help Ukraine? It's not our battle. All it's doing is harm to our relationship with Russia. And the more Moscow threatens, the more these voices questioning their ROK support to the Ukrainians come to the front. But when you look at this globally and you look at this over the long term, and where South Korea's interests are best served by challenging this new world order, that's this illogical, illiberal world order that Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are trying to establish, and advocate for a rules-based order and support those countries that would align with that order, will, in a way that advances South Korea's interests going forward, far beyond the immediate, threats that they're hearing now from Moscow.
Now turning to the NATO summit, Mr. Korn, the NATO summit invited AP4 country leaders for the third year. Now, Russia is already wary of the US, South Korea, Japan alignment as an Asian version of NATO. How seriously does Russia take NATO's deeper engagement, involvement in the Indo-Pacific?
In my experience, the Russians, or at least the current leadership in Russia, is very concerned with the expansion of any kind of relationship. We have to be realistic. This relationship has existed for a long time. The alliance between the United States and South Korea and Japan has been around for a long time. And the Russians have always been sensitive about that. Unfortunately, the Russians feel that they are surrounded and threatened I don't see that the United States or NATO has any plans to invade Russia or to occupy Russia, but this is the paranoia on the side of some of the leadership today in Russia, which is hurting Russia long term, in my own opinion, sadly. And so, they're worried about expansion of NATO influence in Central Asia, in the South Caucasus. We'll have hopefully a historic moment when the leaders or the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan and Armenia are in Washington for the summit, and hopefully moving towards a settlement to a long-term disagreement that has plagued the South Caucasus for years. And the Russians are very upset about that. But we should not let the Russians' concerns or being upset stop us from doing what I think is the right thing, and that is strengthening the relationships. Because I also agree that Seoul has to understand that the threat from Russia now is not isolated to just Europe. The chaos that Russia has caused, let's say, in Ukraine right now and in other parts of the former Soviet Union can be expanded into the Far East. And Seoul needs good alliances, strong alliances, and NATO is definitely an important partner, and no doubt the United States.
Mr. Korn, you watched Russia for a long time. What do you think are Russia's long-term strategy and objectives to the two Koreas? And how do these goals affect the security of the Korean Peninsula? And how can NATO help mitigate the risks posed by Russia's long-term vision for the Korean Peninsula?
Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, I think Russia today, the leadership today in Moscow sees, I'm not sure what the long-term goal is, but they definitely see some value in maintaining the ability to cause instability on the Korean Peninsula. I don't know that they want a resolution to the issues between North Korea and South Korea, or I'm sure they're worried about any unification that is not under, let's say, their control. I believe that this policy of creating disorder or chaos in other parts of the world is driven, sadly, by Moscow's view that anything that hurts the United States is to Moscow's benefit, this kind of zero-sum mentality, which is not helping Russia. It's not helping the Russian people. It's not helping the Russian economy. And of course, instability on the Korean Peninsula would also be a serious threat for Russia itself and the Russian Far East and other parts of Russia. So unfortunately, I think there's a tactical view. People often say that Putin is a strategic thinker. I don't think he's been thinking very strategically or acting strategically in some of the decisions he's been making in the last 5 to 10 years.
Mr. Seiler, you emphasized how South Korea should have that global vision and do not think of Ukraine war as not my war. But there are some people in South Korea who does not want to get entangled to the Ukraine war or the potential Taiwan contingency. To what extent should South Korea cooperate with NATO? And what role does South Korea expect NATO to play in South Korean security?
No, those are great questions, and I think some of that will emerge over the coming days of the summit. We'll get a re-emphasis on why this cooperation with NATO is good for the Republic of Korea, both in terms of its global status as a player on the international stage that is providing support to a friend in need, in this case, Ukraine, while at the same time understanding that if there is a contingency on the Korean Peninsula, and of course we have a number of UN commands sending states that sent troops during the First Korean War that are present there in the United Nations Command today, a number of countries that obviously in times of North Korea aggression against South Korea will be there to help protect South Korea in that regard. And certainly there are other NATO countries with other capabilities that certainly in time of a crisis like that will be crucial to the defense of the Republic of Korea. So I think, it's very prudent and practical for under President Yoon's leadership for the Republic of Korea to get involved with NATO and use this upcoming summit to further emphasize the value that the Republic of Korea places on the institution.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Korn, Mr. Seiler, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll be back here next week with U.S. experts to discuss the two Koreas and the region right here from Washington.